So we are going to talk about gradation, but I'm going to show you an advanced way of thinking of this because we do a couple things that I think in the beginning can serve us well, but quickly we outgrow and they can actually severely limit us. So one is we make things too complicated. What I love is that Einstein, I've said this before, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's important. Genius is not understanding complexity, the complications of things. Genius, he said, was making the complicated simple. And that's a talent and that's a skill to learn, just like drawing a good head, creating a good gradation, which is what we're going to talk about today. Being able to take everything that we see in the world or some little piece of the world, the human body, and making it simple, making the craft skills, not this science and engineering, but simple. So we make things too complicated and it makes them too linear. We got to follow all those steps in the process, whatever number it is, to get a finished portrait or whatever. And then it forces us into one, as they say in some of the old literature, one damn thing after the other. And we can never go off and find our own way because we're impelled through the complication of the process, the long, laborious nature of the process, to just keep doing the next thing, just one step in front of the other. So we make it too complicated. We want to make it simple. And yet we also make it too limiting. We don't define our terms very well. And when we do define them, we either overcomplicate them or we define them without much creativity involved. And creativity is just taking two or more things that most of the world thinks are disconnected and showing actually how they beautifully connect, like light and shadow and so on. I'm going to show you how to connect gradations to any other skill, what I call in my coaching program filters. Filters is any craft or creative idea, any way we might perceive things, simplicity and complexity, edges, color, leaning, facing, tilting, line or tone, any craft tool. Any medium we might choose, oil paint. Any emotion we might attach, making a beautiful, confident, or a graceful, fluid line, or a neurotic, kind of out of balance shape, whatever. Those are the filters, and we can pair them with other filters. We can connect them to other filters. So we're going to take the filter of gradation, which is a transition, a fairly incremental, fairly smooth transition from one thing to another thing. Usually we think of that as from dark to light, but sometimes we'll think of it from intense to gray, or from warm to cool. That's usually as sophisticated as we get, as creative as we get. But it can be anything, gradation, anything. I'm going to show you how that happens. So gradation of any particular skill set, craft tool, idea, how-to idea, we can do a gradation. And we can do a beautiful incremental gradation. Oops. or we can make it a broken gradation, a hatching, and just by opening up the marks, we could give the idea of lightening up, like in a pen and ink drawing. So we can do a more painterly. What happened there? There we go. Way to do it, or a more nuanced, what we usually think of a more perfectly rendered way of doing it. But it's a transition from one thing to the other, dark to light, but we're going to play with it. So let's look at Pontormo, one of my favorites. He was a Mannerist came in after a high Renaissance. Mannerism was something that was developed and begun by Michelangelo, and he pushed it a little farther, in a lot of ways, a lot farther than Michelangelo. So let's look at some gradation. So let's just do this as we normally would. If we were good, solid craftsmen, we'd do a good, solid construction with good, solid shapes, maybe with beautiful gesture, which means that things are, in one way or another, moving into curved or S-curved ideas, into a watery ideas. And it might be the contour, it might be something else. So let's just do this as a good, solid realist would be expected to do this. I'm going to simplify this shadow to make it easier and quicker to work with. When the forms don't blend together very well, they tend to separate by contour line or a zigzagging shadow. And when they do work together pretty well, they usually kind of flow into S-curves. That's not what's going on that thigh, so we'll leave that. And then if we were a little more sophisticated, we'd realize that not only is the form getting darker as it turns to the left, it's getting darker as it tucks down. And the more it tucks down, the more dark it becomes. And the more it turns up, the lighter it becomes. And that's usually where we start doing the gradations. We'll realize that the shadow isn't quite so abrupt. It might slowly blend back into the light. And even the littlest shadows might blend back into the light. And as they blend back into the right that's on the right, back into the light that's on the right, they also blend back into the light that's on the top. And so as we go up that egg of the rib cage, we get lighter and lighter and lighter. Make sure we're good and there's no silent screams for me to do something. Yeah, Mike, I do have the phone on. Thanks. So we might well do that. To greater or lesser effect. But we could take this farther. We could do as Rembrandt taught us to do, who learned it in large part from Michelangelo, or I mean from Leonardo. We could not only just turn the form, because after all, one of the hallmarks of good construction theory is we don't really draw and render the rib cage. We draw a simple shape instead of, and then we give it a simple structure, either a constructed structure, linear construction, whatever that is, or eventually a a tonal structure. And so I could take this same idea of a rib cage that's been simplified by Pontormo, which then has been simplified again by me, and just imagine it was just the simplest possible of egg shapes. And as that egg tucked down, it would get darker. And as it swung over to the left, it would get darker. And we could do a gradation as we just did, coming back up towards the top that is the highest lit part of the egg, and over towards the right, which is also the highest lit part of the egg. And it can jump out at us then with that laws of light or tonal composition idea. Shape of form, shape of the shadow on the form, give the shadow a shape, create a soft edge between those shadow shapes, and then create a gradation to show that there's not an abrupt, but maybe a beautifully slow transition from shadow back into light, or from lightest halftone back down into darkest halftone. And that gradation does its job. But we could also say, well, the whole torso let's just do this. Very crude. What if the whole torso dropped off? What if it was a weak light source coming in? As it comes down, it hits the top of the form in the hottest possible manner, and then the form itself tucks under, but also each form that turns up, like not just the torso, the rib cage and shoulder area, but the stomach and the thighs and the muscles on the thigh. But we overall get a transition. So we could, with a little more understanding of tonal composition, a little more careful lighting of our model or of our still life, we could create this beautiful transition where maybe by the time we get down to the knees, there's no light at all. When we get up to the crotch, it's very soft light. The lightest halftone is much darker than the lightest halftone on the stomach. And the stomach is much darker than the lightest halftone on the ribs. And the ribs are much darker than the lightest halftone on the shoulder. And so we could create a gradation over the whole thing. And that's one of the things I'll do when I'm creating a, let's say I've got a worker here. Say a worker painting. I might have this worker doing this. He's leaning over to pick up something, let's say, whatever he's doing. I've got all these folds that I've carefully drawn out, pretend I've carefully drawn them out. And I have the light and shadow pattern maybe carefully drawn out. That's not so careful, is it? So I might well have this, let's make that a little smaller, I guess. Okay. Let's say this is the shadow pattern. All this leg is in shadow. All the front of the pants are in shadow. We have these diaper folds. They create this zigzag of these. So there's my beautifully rendered shadow pattern. Let's do this. And maybe we put that in an environment even, like a Rembrandt with a dark. So now I'm separating light from shadow and foreground from background. Foundation of realist tonal composition. Arranging not just the shapes and the structures and the careful drawing, but the values between, and the value changes between foregrounds and backgrounds and light side and shadow side and things like that. Now I could start rendering as we did here a few minutes ago, each structure of the egg of the rib cage and the eggs or spare tire muscles of the stomach and the structure of the hips and so on. Or I could break it down like this, or even before I put the shadows side on. And now I could do a gradation over the whole thing. Give me a second to get this right. Now I could go just in the light side and drop off everything in the light side with a beautiful gradation. And that's a beautiful gradation. Like so. And then I could render all the beautiful light and shadows we did on that rib cage and stomach and so on. I could do it in the shadows. I could do a gradation that's a little darker at the bottom of the shadow, a little lighter at the top of the shadow. Or I could reverse the gradation even. I could just be playful with it. Now I can push the shadows darker here as it's away from the light sand on the beach and allow those pants to get lighter in the shadow as that maybe hot light of the sand bounces up into the shadow of those pants. Maybe even start to lose the difference between light and shadow. I could gradate any way I want. I could gradate in the background too. We won't do that for time's sake. So notice I can use that gradation in creative ways, gradating the amount of light that hits or doesn't hit, how quickly something turns up into full light and falls down into ambient light and then drops again into shadow, non-light. I could gradate this way. this way, this way, this way, every which way, in any direction, light to dark and dark to light, and I could probably find a realistic reason to do it. That's gradation. And that's great, using gradation in a much fuller sense of the word. But let's go back here again. And now we could create gradation in all sorts of ways. What if I wanted to gradate the eggs in some way? Not in value, but the eggs themselves. What if I chose to create a subtle gradation from bigger eggs at the top to smaller eggs at the bottom, and going from rib cage, egg of the rib cage, the egg of the stomach, the egg of the pubic area, create a gradation there. What if I made the eggs more squished as they went? So now I'm going to draw the egg of the rib cage. And the egg of the upper hips, maybe even making them more feminine. To the egg of the flanks. And making them even more squished. I'm just going to cut off the thigh here so we can now see this kind of very oddly proportioned snowman. Notice how I went from here to here to here, ever more squished eggs. That's a gradation. What if I went, how are we doing on time? Almost done here. Let's see. What if we went from more actively wobbled contour lines to quieter, less wobbly lines? Gets really active here and then quiets down. And then maybe the time it gets up into that lower arm, it's beautifully soft and fluid. And what if we gradated it in both directions? So now it's also most active here, and now it's going to become less active here. Might force us to get a little more separation than we're really seeing at the beginning, and a little less separation than we're seeing at the end. But now it's gradating, it's pushing out with ever less force. quieting down, quieting down. Now, maybe you're starting to get the idea. I could pick any craft idea. What if I made it super, the shadows, super complicated at the ribs. I'm going to pretend there's a shadow shape here. And ever less complicated down the stomach, hips, and legs. Maybe I need to quiet that down even more. That's a gradation. How about the amount of little details becoming bigger and fewer details, or just fewer details, or the egg shapes becoming ever more triangular shapes. Endless variations, lots of color down to less color. Those are the obvious ones, but even so, oftentimes we don't think of them. We can create any gradation out of any craft idea imaginable. We just have to imagine it. We have to play with it. We have to practice and be curious about it. Excuse me. Let's see, let me check my, looks like we're still doing pretty well. And again, this is Pontormo. What if it was the amount of overlapping? What if it was not the amount of overlapping or just the amount of overlapping? How about if the overlaps cut in really strong, and then as they move along, they still overlap, but the overlaps become closer and closer to hugging the contour. This breaks all the way across, or points more across the short axis. This is going this way, this is going this way, it's going this way, this is going this way. And now by the time we get down here, those overlaps are on top of each other. That would be a gradation. So what are you gradating? What is the transition from this beautiful mark making, skill creating, craft using to the next thing? What if it starts very realistic and becomes more and more impressionistic, more and more expressionistic, and finally more and more abstract? That would be a gradation through art history. I did that in one painting one time, and it sold. I sold it. That's a gradation. So tighter and tighter realism, and finally looser and looser strokes. Sharper and sharper contours, moving into soft edges, finally into lost edges. Going from all tonal to ever more line to only line. That's a gradation. So think creatively, guys. It takes practice. It's not easy, even though it's simple when we say it, but to come up with it, it's taking two things, and oftentimes what it's doing is we're playing with extremes. the light values get more and more dark values. The light side makes a beautiful gradation into the shadowy world. The simplicity of silhouettes gradates to a very complex silhouette filled with detail that kind of breaks and obscures the silhouette. The rendered strokes, the lost strokes, lose the mark making in the rendering process, become more and more loose, broken, apparent strokes, and so on. Any craft idea, deep focus to shallow focus, long lens to short lens, close up to far away, whatever it is, we can create a gradation around that. All right, so I think we'll leave that there. Let's see here, I'll check real quick. Looks like we're good. All right, my friends. Let's see here. Let me get back on screen. I think we'll leave it there. So work on your craft, learning to distill these difficult things into simple ideas. That's its own genius. It's its own complexity, reduced down to a place where you can understand it and your audience can understand it, and where you can play with it. And that's its own skill. You'll get better at looking at these ideas like gradation and like laws of light and anatomy and stuff, line and tone. We'll get better at taking those and making them simpler and getting more playful. And then once you start to get the hang of that, start playing with extremes. Simplicity to complexity, realism to abstraction. It's a round to triangle, egg to triangle, whatever it is. This to that. You can start playing with that. Now you've got choices anywhere from the extremes and anywhere within the extremes. You can use that in your piece. And you can pair several of those continuums between this and that playful search for what's beautiful in terms of how light or how dark it is, how detailed or how complex it is. And you can do that, and you can slowly, incrementally, or quickly, abruptly change that. Once you do that, now you're off and running. Now the whole world's your playground. You can do almost anything you want with these things. And once you understand how to keep it simple, if you do get in areas that are craft challenges, because it's going to happen to everybody, you can simplify those areas, or you can design them out by gradation, losing focus, blurring it out so you don't have to show how bad you drew the hands or something like that. Or lose the hand completely in a boxing glove or something like that. So we can make these transitions here with playful to play up our strengths, to discover our strengths, to find our voice, but also to play down those things that might hurt the piece or areas that we're not quite as masterful now as we hope to be someday. All right, so I'm going to leave it there.